Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island
attempting to speak truly, if not truthfully, about lost things in lost places with lost words in a lost song, and somehow bring them to be found. Welcome, everybody. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen. I thank those of you that have taken time to join us this evening for a live broadcast. Thank you for taking the time to do so and for being with us in fellowship and dialogue. And I appreciate all of you and thank you for um, the opportunity to bring forth truth and all perspectives and angles as we go down the rabbit hole and trying to decipher the illusion parading as reality and help those of you that have been seeking and looking for guidance and direction in how to make sense of the insanity that we perceive happening around us as world, and especially with in my opinion this being the last days, the end times, and with the quickly accelerating pace of as far as insanity being broadcast and pushed forth by the elites, the globalists, and um, trying to bring the world into um, what they envision as a police state um, and global world government and controlled and what will be institution basically for the reign of the Antichrist. And so we're going to be talking to Dr. Bob Thiel tonight about many of these issues and in discussion of the several publications and the many books that he has brought forth and talking about all of these esoteric questions and answers. And so, Dr. Bob, are you there?
Certainly I am.
Well, thank you, sir, for joining us in very short order. It wasn't even just yesterday that I was that I had opportunity to invite you on, and so I appreciate you coming on short notice. And I've been wanting to bring you on for a long time now, and and we did talk about that. I guess it's been even more than a month ago, but Dr. Bob, before we go into some of the things that we will be discussing, if you would, can you give out your website information as well as quickly the different books that you have published over the years?
Yeah, I've published a lot of books. As far as just a general website, I have one called cogwriter.com. That's cogwriter.com. That has both theological things, prophetic things, etc. As far as books, my latest book is Hillary Clinton, Prophecy and the Destruction of the United States. That one came out about a year ago, trying to say what might happen, why Hillary Clinton is apocalyptic, what happens, some of the things she may do if she gets into office. Prior to that, I wrote a similar book about Barack Obama. And if listeners are interested, you can find those at links to it at the cogwriter.com website. But if you just go to Amazon and you type in Hillary Clinton prophecy or Barack Obama prophecy, my book should come up. And if your listeners if they don't come up, and this is one bad thing about me doing radio. I do radio a lot, but my last name is just not a name that people can figure out how to spell because my ancestors didn't spell it like Americans do it. My last name is spelled Thiel. It's T like Thomas, TH like Thomas, IEL. And Thiel is the correct pronunciation, but because of how it's spelled, sometimes people say, I typed in TEAL and it didn't come up in Amazon. And I certainly wouldn't come up in Amazon. Now, an older book that I'm not, people don't need to get this one for sure, but this was one I wrote called 2012 and the Rise of the Secret Sect back in 2009. Back then, I warned everybody that the world was not going to end in 2012, that the 2012 people were wrong, that yes, there were Mayan prophecies that possibly pointed to that, but there's a lot of events had to happen that hadn't happened yet. And what's interesting about that particular book is as of December 22nd, 2012, world events, at least either completely or partially confirmed 30 some predictions that were in that book. So my track record on this stuff is pretty good. And we've got other books and booklets and stuff that are out there, and we'll probably talk about some of them as we get a little further. But to tie some of what's going on into some of the subjects that you mentioned, for no better reason other than the fact that I did a post about him a couple of days ago. If you don't mind, we'll start off with Donald Trump. And
Yes,
the
yes, please.
presidential election.
That
Well,
would be
Donald
great.
Trump is kind of interesting. Now, I know a lot of Donald Trump supporters. I am not one of them, by the way, but lest I give the wrong impression, I'm certainly not a Hillary Clinton supporter. Okay, so
I'm
I
in
want
your
to start
camp.
off with that I'm not taking a pro-Republican or pro-Democrat view here. As you alluded to, many people who are Republicans or Democrats are pretty much into the whole New World Order kind of thing. They want,
Right.
they don't tell people that's what they want, but they act like that's what they want. On the other hand, you've got somebody right now who's definitely an outsider. That's Donald Trump. Now, he's an outsider. Now, because he's got lots of money and he's got properties all over the world, he probably to a great degree is a globalist, but in this particular election, he's kind of breaking that mold. He's actually running as a nationalist. And just to explain the difference between the two, we have Barack Obama, who is a globalist. Barack Obama takes it publicly further than any other previous US president. Barack Obama basically believes that the United States should apologize for anything it's done to affect the world, more or less. It seems like that. And that the world would be better off if the United States was reined in by the United Nations and other international treaties and groups and whatever. And he seems determined to get the United States to be subservient to regulations that come from outside the country for whatever reason. And that would be consistent with what you would call a globalist agenda. And you mentioned before, as far as the Antichrist power, et cetera, we're going to see the development that will turn into that in the future. But now you've got Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump is both a globalist and a nationalist. What does that mean? It means he does view things globally. He's got properties in different parts of the world. But I'm going to digress slightly. A long time ago, a roommate of mine wanted me to read a book called Winning by Intimidation. It's either winning by or winning through intimidation. I don't remember which one. And as a Christian, I didn't think that was really necessarily the kind of book I should be reading. But he said, no. He says, it's you'll see. So I read the book. Now, according to the book, the author of this book, there were three types of people. And I'm going to tie this into the election in just a moment.
Do you remember the author by chance?
No.
Okay, that's
I'm
fine.
sorry. It's either winning through
Yep.
intimidation or winning by intimidation.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Anyway, the guy said there were three kinds of people. So the first type of person was out for everything he can get, and he lets you know it. The second type of person is out for everything he can get, but doesn't want you to know that. And the third type of person was out for everything they could get, but they didn't know that that's how they were. Okay?
Mhm.
So in this particular election cycle, Donald Trump is under the first category. Now, by the way, I think there are actually people who follow the Bible and try to do things out of love, et cetera. But in the book, there are only those three choices. Now, the author really liked type 1 people. He said they're out for, basically his view is everybody is selfish. Everybody's out for wherever they can get. And someone who lets you know it up front is at least being honest with you, and you know where you stand with this type of person. And while I can't vouch for Donald Trump always being honest, and I have severe issues with some of his judgments and some of his statements, he's kind of a type 1 person. He's out for what he can get, and he's telling people when he runs for office, look, I'm a nationalist. I'm going to make a deal that the Chinese are going to have to not get what they're doing to us. The Mexicans aren't going to do it. And by the way, you Europeans, you got to pay for more of your defense. We've been financing you forever. You need to pay for this. Now, those are all fairly nationalistic sounding names. There's a lot of problems, though. One is that when you tell the Europeans they're going to have to start to pay more for their military, the Europeans are going to finally decide, why give it to the United States? Because they don't trust the United States. As a matter of fact, there's a former defense minister of Germany. His name is Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg. And by the way, if you want more information about him, I just did a YouTube video about him. And there's also an article at the cogwriter.com website. You can read a lot about him. Well, anyway, he said that the U.S. presidential primaries forget Europe. He said they don't care about Europe at all. And then, but for Donald Trump, he calls him the blonde lunatic named Donald. So you've got a situation where you've got people in Europe, and I mentioned Gutenberg because I've followed him a fair amount lately. They're saying, look, the United States, you people are crazy. You don't care about us. You just want what you want. And you got people like Donald Trump telling the rest of the world, listen, world, you're trying to take from us, and I'm going to get it and give it to you. So basically, he tries to appeal to the selfishness of his voters. And so does Mrs. Clinton, by the way. I'm going to get to her in just a minute or two or whatever. But so you got Donald Trump out there. And in terms of the Antichrist, I want to first of all tell you, I do not believe Donald Trump is the Antichrist. Okay. All right. Even if he gets elected, all right. I don't believe he's the Antichrist for lots of different reasons. But because of his brash statements, whether or not he gets into office, his brash statements have offended many people in the world, and many of those people in the world do not like what he has to say. Many of these people are saying, if the United States could elect Donald Trump or almost nominate Donald Trump, we can't trust the United States. Now, I'm not saying this to say that the rest of the world can be trusted, okay? For example, the Chinese, just FYI, they don't trust the Chinese. I was reading something about this about a year ago, some article about there, and the Chinese don't really trust the Chinese. So it's not like if they distrust the United States that they're really trustworthy. But because of statements, for example, that Donald Trump has said, as well as, by the way, some Barack Obama has said, you've got more people around the world distrusting the United States and thinking that they're going to have to look to another option. And we'll get to some of those other options later. Now, if you don't mind a prophecy, now this is a biblical prophecy, and it won't sound all that dramatic probably to people, but I'd like to quote something if it's all right.
Yes, please. Certainly.
I'm going to quote 2 Timothy 3, verse 1. Now, think about this in the vein of Donald Trump, okay? It said, the Apostle Paul wrote, but know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come. Now, you said earlier, you think we're in the last days. I agree. I think the 21st century is it. Anyway, it says, men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. That's through verse 3. Well, most of those Donald Trump would even admit to.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then it says, traitors, this is verse 4, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Let's go to that last part. Donald Trump, someone asked him about last July. You make mistakes. Do you ever ask God for forgiveness? He said, no. Why should I? But he goes out and tells everybody he's a Christian.
Right.
Okay? We can argue about what is a Christian, but one of the things is you're supposed to confess your sins, okay? Repent, and he doesn't seem to understand the concept.
Right.
And then the Bible's next verse says, and from such turn away. Okay, that's enough of that particular passage.
Right.
So you've got that particular thing in the Bible warning that some people are going to rise up like that. And you've got Mr. Trump, again, doesn't mean he's going to be elected, but his approach has certainly influenced some others to try to become a bit more bold and whatever else you want to say about it. And now, I'm not endorsing Ted Cruz either, but he said something about Donald Trump a couple of weeks ago that I thought was pretty insightful. He said, Donald Trump will say something in the morning and truly believe it. Then in the afternoon, he'll say the opposite and deny that he said it in the morning, and he'll still believe that too. And so I consider him somebody to watch. Now, having said all these negative things about the man, I want to make it clear. I think he's right that the trade agreements are not always in the best interest of the United States. I think he's right that the trade negotiators sometimes just want a deal so bad they don't care about the details, and that hurts the United States. I think the blue-collar working class people have been hurt by some of these deals. I think that some corporate things that are done are wrong. I think that Donald Trump is correct that the United States needs to look at its borders. I think Donald Trump is correct that a lot of terrorists are Muslims, and perhaps we should do something about that. I don't know if you heard what happened about a week ago. Was it Friday, I think it was, or Thursday. The president of France, Hollande, said that Islamic terrorism was a big problem, right? And the U.S. Put his speech up. They got rid of the words Islamic terrorism out of his speech. Okay? Then people caught it, by the way. And then the government said, oh, well, we didn't really mean to do it. Just happened to be a glitch at that exact spot.
Yeah, right.
And right, well, one of the reasons I have difficulty with that is one of the websites that I go to fairly often, which will sound strange, but I'll explain in just a second. One of the websites I go to fairly often is voiceofamerica.com website. Now, that's an official United States government website. The reason I go there is a couple of reasons. First of all, there's no copyright restrictions, so I can take anything I want from there. Don't have to worry if I take 4 pages worth of stuff because I'm not violating a copyright.
Nice.
The other is that it covers international news better than a lot of other sites. Plus, it doesn't have pop-ups and other kinds of stuff. On the other hand, while sometimes it pretends to be fair and balanced, I don't see certain things about Islamic terrorism. I don't see certain things about the news. They give you the news, some of the news, enough to try to look like sometimes they give you both sides, but they don't always give you both sides. So then when I hear about this Islamic terrorism thing, when the French president met with Obama last week, and it's like, okay, at least Donald Trump has the guts to go out and say that Islam has a big problem. Now, I don't think he necessarily has the right solution to the problem, but a lot of people are saying, look, we've got a society that's too politically incorrect. They won't say that Islamic terrorism is the problem and we need to deal with it. Instead, the solution supposedly is pretend it's not a problem and bring in 80,000 Syrian refugees every year for who knows how many years. And actually, if you don't mind, see if I can find this one. There's a prophecy in the book of Isaiah. Yeah. There's a prophecy in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 12, that warns about the Syrians and the Palestinians. It's somewhat of an end-time prophecy. And you've got over in Europe, they brought in a bazillion Syrians. And over in the United States and in Canada, for that matter, they've been talking about bringing more and more Syrians. And the Bible warns that this is going to cause a problem. But these people who claim to be Christian, Mrs. Clinton and Barack Obama specifically both claim to be Christian. Maybe we'll get into that, maybe we won't. But they don't seem to pay any attention to what the Bible warns about. They're not at all worried about Antichrist power rising up. They're not at all concerned about prophecies about terrorism. There's biblical prophecies that you'll have terrorism within. That means within your own country. Mm-hmm. And we've got a situation where we know that most terrorism in the world, large-scale terrorism, not all of it, but most of it, or much of it at least, comes from Islamic terrorists. Yet we want to bring in more Islamists into this country and other countries, knowing full well that the Islamic State has said that they want to infiltrate Europe and the United States. They want to destabilize them from some of these people that are going to come in this country.
Well,
So,
especially when you consider that the specific terrorists that our government has funded and groomed are the ones that they are hiding among those kind of refugees and bringing them in into the country, and so they have the training and they are brought in specifically for the false flag terrorism.
well, we've got a situation where uh, the government seems to think it's got more and more rights, more and more authority, and the rest of us don't. We have limited rights to privacy right now. Currently, we still have the right to think, perhaps, but in terms of freedom of speech, you're seeing more and more restrictions on that. Now, at risk of potentially offending your audience, for example, when the Supreme Court last year decided that marriage is no longer a state right, but a federal right, and the federal government had legalized homosexual marriage across the country, I immediately did a sermon on that subject because at some point in time, YouTube or the government's going to stop us from being able to say stuff like that, say that we're against it. They're going to call that hate speech.
Hate speech, right?
Right. And, you know, it's what's almost funny is 20 years ago, the Clintons signed a law that made it illegal to, marriage is only between a man and a woman. Now, if you agree with what they agreed to 20 years ago, you're a homophobe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, or whatever precise number of years that bill was signed, I don't remember, but you've got a situation where we're seeing less freedom of speech, and that is the kind of thing that will lead toward the acceptance of the type of world order that's going to be coming. Now, I've spent a fair amount of time on Mr. Trump, so let's go to Mrs. Clinton. Of course, she also claims to be Christian. She claims to be a Methodist. Now, I don't know if any of your listeners did this or not, but I pre-ordered Hillary Clinton's book about 2 years ago called Hard Choices. She was kind of following after Barack Obama. Barack Obama wrote a book before he announced he was going to run for president to get a chance to get some stuff out there. And people bought it, and some of them liked him, and they liked his ideas, and he became president. Well, Mrs. Clinton did the same thing, but not too many people bought the book. Now, could be that they thought they already knew about Mrs. Clinton, or they liked her, or they didn't like her. It also could be because of the internet. People may not think they need to buy books as much as they used to. But whatever, I actually bought this book. It was a heavy book. It was 600 and some pages and pretty thick. I would say about 3 inches thick. And I read it. And I was not a fan of Mrs. Clinton before I read her book. But then after I read the book, I was less of a fan. In her book, by the way, for those of you who believe in biblical morality, let me simply say you might be surprised to find out that one of her 4 priorities as Secretary of State, according to her, not according to some conspiracy theory, but published in her own book, was to push the LGBT agenda across the world. You say, okay, well, whatever. Now, some of you don't like the fact your taxes were used for that. But some of you might be surprised to realize that this is actually one of the reasons why the United States doesn't get along with Russia. You say, huh? What's that got to do with Russia? Well, you might remember that Hillary Clinton brought a reset button over to Russia to push as a prop. So with her counterpart over there, Sergei Lavrov, to reset relations between the U.S. and Russia. Okay, because they didn't think they were so good. We were going to fix it. We, meaning the Obama administration, which I'm not part of course. We're going to fix it, and that's what she was going to do. But in her book, she said later that she kept working with this guy over there in Russia. Then she said, well, the normally calm and poised Sergei Lavrov got upset when I pushed the LGBT agenda on him. He just was no longer friendly. He basically told me that it's not illegal to be homosexual in our country, but we don't want your version of it over here, so it's none of your business. This is an internal matter for our country. Go away. And people will say, so what? Okay, whatever. There's no ramifications to any of this stuff. Well, not too long after that, the U.S. quit talking to Russia. Not too long after that, the United States decided that the democratically elected president of Ukraine had to go. He was elected, but he liked Russia. Now, why the United States thought it had any business in Ukraine to go against the will of the voters there, I don't know. But they supported the coup, and they supported the ouster of the democratically elected president over there. And the U.S. and Russia have been pretty tense ever since. Now, lately, with some of the stuff going on in Syria and Iran, the United States is trying to talk to Russia again. But all this had to do with a policy that Mrs. Clinton had and that she pushed. And so there are ramifications of these moral issues that have an effect on politics.
Well, I don't know if you heard this or not, or had looked into it as far as her particular leanings, but according to Stu Webb, she leans that direction and is bisexual herself. Um,
Yeah,
anyways,
a lot of people have said that. Um, it hasn't become public enough that I'm going to say that's for sure.
hold on, Dr. Bob. We'll be right back, everyone. Welcome back, everybody. Um, in talking about the New World Order, there's a specific thing that I want to make mention of, which falls in line with what we're talking about this evening, currently, as far as a homosexuality as an alternative lifestyle. And this has to do with the 10-point plan that was put forth by Alice Bailey in bringing forth the New World Order. And that 10-point plan had everything to do with destroying um, the natural structure of the family and creating promiscuity, um, teaching open sexuality to children, appealing to children's rights so that they can um, basically punish parents for not going along with the plan and the system as far as the educational system and um, the promiscuity that they would be teaching through the sex education and within schools. But specifically, I want to read just a comment from number 6, because this was such a large part of the agenda that number 6 on the 10-point plan was to make homosexuality an alternative lifestyle. And it says this about that. Alice Bailey preached over 65 years ago that sexual enjoyment is the highest pleasure in humanity. No one must be denied and no one must be restricted how to enjoy themselves. People should be allowed in whichever way they choose they want, whether it is homosexuality or incest or bestiality, as long as the two agree. In the world today, so many laws have been made that promote homosexuality and give so much freedom to gay rights that a time will come when it is illegal for a preacher to mention homosexuality as an abomination in the eyes of God, or to read scripture publicly that talk about homosexuality. At the international scene, Western nations now sanction African countries that have resisted homosexuality with threats of withdrawing foreign aid and investments. Today, many churches marry gays, lesbians, and ordain gay priests. And the reason I bring this up, because this is just the first step in the direction of expanding sexuality and the definition of it, and along with the rights. And pretty soon you will see the follow up will be making pedophilia legal and bestiality legal, incest to different degree legal, and that this is all just will be the next domino to fall after what we are seeing being expanded and being discussed and voted on today on the state level. Dr. Bob?
Well, getting related to some of that, as I mentioned before, Hillary Clinton, that was one of her top four listed priorities as Secretary of State, was to push the LGBT agenda. And she boasted about attending LGBT parties or something that all of her staff got to go to and all this. And it was just astounding when I read this. This was from her own words, so that really kind of hit me. But to contrast her a little bit from Donald Trump, she's definitely a globalist. Okay, Donald Trump can be influenced globally, but he's trying to come across as a nationalist, and he's probably a nationalist because he's a bit more me first kind of a guy. He lets you know that. That's getting back to that Winning Through Intimidation book I mentioned to you before. Now you've got Mrs. Clinton. Now she either knows what she's doing is bad, or she doesn't know what she's doing is bad. Now, according to the author of Winning Through Intimidation, the worst type of people were those who wanted everything for themselves, but they didn't realize that they want everything for themselves. He said they were the most dangerous ones. He says because they actually believe that they're selfless, even though that's not true. And with Mrs. Clinton, it's hard to know. I kind of put her in between. I think she knows some of the stuff she does is bad, but she still thinks that overall it's good for everybody anyway, so she knows best. But she's definitely a globalist. She's definitely attempting to create her version of a new world order. It's certainly not the United States first. That all being said, politically, she seems to be willing to change based on what she thinks she needs to say in order to get votes. Of course, a lot of politicians are like that. She just seems to be a bit more extreme on that. And the question is, what would she really do when she's president? No one knows. Now, both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are both hardworking people. Hillary put in tons of hours, traveled more than any other Secretary of State, I think, in the history of the country. But just because someone works hard doesn't mean what they're working for is what we want. But
Exactly.
in my book on Hillary Clinton Prosecuting Destruction of the United States, I list 20 reasons why I think that she's apocalyptic. What I mean by that is that she's doing things that will result in the rise of the beast power and the Antichrist. And people are seeing what's going on in the United States. Never before we've ever had a primary season where the two leading candidates have such high disapproval ratings or dislike ratings, whichever term you want to use. And it's long been said that the lesser of two evils is still evil or not good. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in this election yet. At this instant, it certainly looks like Mrs. Clinton is going to win the Democratic nomination. The Republican nomination really depends on how Donald Trump feels he's treated. If he gets the nomination, okay, then he'll be happy with that. If he doesn't get the nomination and he's really mad and he decides to run on his own, that'll pretty much guarantee Hillary Clinton's going to get in.
Right.
So at this instant, I suspect that Hillary's more likely to get in. And if she does, we've got a globalist there. Of course, on the other Democratic side, you've got Bernie Sanders. And Mrs. Clinton today said, by the way, she wasn't sure if Bernie Sanders was a Democrat. And that's because Bernie Sanders is a communist. Now, he calls himself a socialist, but he has the same objectives, his policies, the same one that the U.S. Communist Party lists on their website. And he's always had close ties with the Communist Party. And the communists have always tended to be a different type of globalist. So you've got either Mrs. Clinton, who's definitely a globalist, or Bernie Sanders, who's some kind of one. Neither of them believe in free enterprise, the way the United States was founded. They don't believe in religious freedom, the way the United States was founded. Matter of fact, not too years and years ago, Bernie Sanders said there should be no charities, by the way. So the government should take care of all that. Should never be any other charities, just the government. Okay? So, and his thinking is affecting Hillary because Hillary's trying to compete against him. Right now, I think he won 7 out of the last 8 states. But because of how the Democratic Party is set up, it looks still like Mrs. Clinton's probably going to get in. And therefore, as I wrote in my book, there's 20 things that she's done or will do that I think are apocalyptic. And this includes doing things such as taking away freedoms in this country. She has made many misstatements. She's had many memory lapses. My book, Hillary Clinton, Prophecy and Destruction of the United States, goes into a bunch of her scandals. So we have a choice we might have a choice between her and Donald Trump. Now, risk of repeating myself, you might recall that I read 2 Timothy 3 talking about Donald Trump. Well, when I read about Mrs. Clinton, lovers of themselves, think so. Lovers of money, well, she said they were dirt poor when it turned out they had, I don't know, $10 or $20 million. I forgot what that was.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really make me think she was dirt poor.
Right.
Boasters, proud, blasphemers. Yeah, blasphemers. She went out and said, a week or two after she announced her nomination, her running for the presidency of the United States, that basically religion needed to be changed to be her view. She doesn't like the fact that the Bible, for example, talks against homosexuality, etc. Disobedient to parents. She's completely politically different from her parents. Unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving. She has a reputation, by the way, of coming back and extracting revenge, which is what Travelgate was about, amongst other things. And I'm going back in memories of some of your listeners. Some of you may not have known about that one. Slanders, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. If you talk against homosexuality, you talk about against transgender toilets and breast rooms and all this stuff, and abortion, she despises you. She thinks you're horrible. Traitors, she's a traitor to the Bible. She's certainly headstrong, haughty, lovers of at least political pleasure more than God. She claims to have a form of godliness, but she denies its power to do. From such turn away. And I read the same prophecy about Mrs. Clinton and Mr. Trump. To me, they both fit.
Right. Which is why I'm particularly not voting. Because I'm not going to be, the lesser of two evils. And besides, I know that the way that the electoral process has been established is they always give us 2 people that are representative of the same side, the 2 sides of the same coin, and that the left and right are basically controlled opposition, and that the elites have selected them before they even become, candidates, like offering us 2 members of the same familial bloodline, kissing cousins, as I wrote in my article. But in the articles, several articles when I used to write back in the day on the political stuff. But anyways, I wanted to ask you also, when you get to a point, if you could speak about a little bit about um, how her actions also led to the ambassador being killed in Libya, and how that was really treasonous, and how really she should be on trial um, for all of that, and how it also led to other military soldiers being killed. 6 people was it, I believe, that were killed because of the cover up and the scandal in connection to all that. If you have any particulars on it.
Okay, there's a couple of comments. First of all, I actually called this email gate. We'll get to Benghazi in just a second. I called it email gate before I read it in the papers. I wrote about it. And I was in the military. And I remember them talking to us about information. And when I left the military, I was actually with a defense contractor for a while, and I got some kind of very low level security clearance. And they scare you to death. You can't do anything close to what Mrs. Clinton did. They tell you can't do anything like that. Yet you've got Mrs. Clinton, who had all these emails on her server, and then which is illegal, she signed papers she wouldn't do that. And according to people like her, ignorance of the law is no excuse, and she's claiming ignorance. She had it set up specially. Then she had all her emails, supposedly she turned them over, but deleted like 31,000 of them that she thought were private or personal, which are probably ones that could include some on Benghazi. She had her email server clean so no one can recover it. So you got the FBI trying to figure this out, but you got the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch. Some hope that she might actually pursue this. Others think, no, it's too political. It's terrible that you've got law enforcement officials who are basically just political appointees and political hacks. And it's not just the federal government. A lot of police chiefs, they get their job because they speak politically correct and they say what the other people want them to say. But you've got a situation where I think Mrs. Clinton has done many things that are questionable, and I think, in my opinion, some of which are criminal.
Absolutely.
Benghazi. It's criminal for her to have tried to blame the Benghazi attacks on some Protestant's video or something about Islam. Islam has all this stuff about destroying Christianity, destroying Catholicism, destroying the United States, destroying Europe, all this stuff. And you've got some small Protestant group that does some half-baked video that's not, they're not cutting off people's heads like the Islamic State's doing. And supposedly that's a big thing. And she blamed that when she told her daughter Chelsea full well she knew that wasn't the cause. I mean, that was disingenuous. She should have been fired for that.
Right.
And then as far as people dying, she should have some responsibility for it. And I heard her use her politically correct speech, if you will, on two of the hearings that she was in. But they didn't go for the jugular on her, and they're not finding, or they haven't released stuff that enough people are upset about. But I think the fact she told her daughter one thing, the same time she was telling the American public something different, I think that of herself she should be criminally prosecuted for. Okay. Now, did she have a greater responsibility for protection security? Absolutely. Okay. Ambassadors aren't going to write her and say, look, we're about to get creamed. We need more security. Do something.
Right.
Unless they mean it, because, ambassadors are, generally speaking, political appointees, and they don't want to die, of course, most of them. And you would think she would have responded. And so I didn't think she did her job right. She's blaming other branches of the government for not providing security. But if she was my boss and I was an ambassador to Libya and she wouldn't do it, I don't know what else I'm supposed to do is go to her. Okay, because I don't think I have the right to call the commandant of the Marines. That's going out kind of outside the chain of command. Again, I was former military. The chain of command you're supposed to follow. She takes responsibility, but she didn't get hurt by this. I mean, well, she's had some minor political heat from it, but no one fined her, nobody jailed her. So she took responsibility for nothing.
Right.
So, anyway, so that's some of her, and again, her globalist agenda. Now, you want to go into more of that kind of stuff. Do you know there's a new movie coming out called Armageddon?
No.
All right. Now, I'm not promoting this movie, but it's supposed to come out in May, I think, about the middle of May. May 13th. And they're claiming it's the movie the establishment doesn't want you to know. And this particular movie, basically, from what I went to the website of the movie when I heard about it a couple days ago. And basically, it says that in the not so distant future, the United States government is going to conspire with the United Nations to stage an attack on the energy grid. So basically, an EMP type event. So to make it so after a little while, if people don't have power, you've got a lot of people in this country who are so addicted to their cell phones that they didn't have them for 2 or 3 days. They have withdrawals, if
Right.
not 3 hours. And basically, they want, according to the plot of the movie, they want to do this. So after a week or two of this, or whatever amount of time, there's chaos in the country. And so the government can implement martial law, take away people's guns, and then the United Nations rules. Okay.
Right.
I don't believe that's how it's going to happen. But I don't believe that the United Nations itself is going to be the party. I think they may be involved, but I do believe it's possible that the United States is going to be hit by some type of EMP attack, whether it's from Islamic terrorists or some of our allies that will turn against us. For your listeners who are not familiar with the Bible, or at least not all the Bible, of course, the Bible's a pretty big book, so it's kind of hard to be familiar with every part of it. There are prophecies, for example, in the book of Lamentations, that, let me read this one. It says, how lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow she is, who was great among the nations. She's become a slave. It says, all her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They become her enemies. Now, what does that mean in plain English? It means that there's some great power that's going to be betrayed by its allies.
Right.
Now, the United Nations, I don't really consider it an ally of the United States.
Right.
I guess some think it is, and some think it's the last great hope for for the world. Of course, the last great hope. The only real hope is repentance and the return of Jesus Christ down
Yes.
the kingdom of God. But the Bible warns that the nation's going to be betrayed by her friends. And so while I don't believe it will be the United Nations per se, I do believe with some of what the Obama administration has done, some of what Hillary Clinton has done and said she's going to do, and even statements from Barack Obama, not Barack Obama, but I mean Donald Trump, is getting us to the point where some of our allies are looking at turning against us. Now, one of the things your listeners are aware of, I believe, or most of them, is when you talk about the beast and Antichrist power, you go to Revelation chapter 13, and it talks about you can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast,
right.
or the number of his name and all that kind of stuff. Well, think about this. When the Apostle John was given a revelation, how could you possibly have controlled buying and selling?
Right.
Okay? You go up to a farmer, you give him a coin, or you give him, let's say, you swap some clothes for food or whatever. They couldn't control that back 1900 years ago. That was not controllable. I mentioned that at the get-go to let people realize why you can trust Bible prophecy. And by the way, there are people out there called preterists who say the book of Revelation was fulfilled back in 70 AD. Nonsense. You couldn't control buying and selling in 70 AD. You
Right.
couldn't control buying and selling 100 years ago. You can almost control it now. You can't quite control it now, but you can almost control it now because more and more transactions are done electronically. So people who wonder, well, you can't trust Bible prophecy. Of course you can trust Bible prophecy. Why? How else could there be a prophecy 1900 years ago? They're going to be able to control buying and selling.
Right.
You've got a situation with the Bush administration and the Obama administration and whatever next administration we're going to get to, probably, where they want more control, more financial reporting, all this kind of stuff to set this up. Now, for a couple of years back, the Edward Snowden leaks came out there and showed that the world, the United States, was spying on everything. And why is that relevant? Well, Lamentations warns, Lamentations 1 verse 2, that your friends are going to become your enemies. Well, when the Germans and the Europeans read the United States was spying on them, the United States was spying on the Germans, by the way, as much as they were spying on China, and that they considered only what they call the Five Eyes, the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, were the only ones exempted from spying on themselves. This upset the Europeans, and they said, wait a second, you're treating us like we're enemies. And then they found the United States actually planted bugs in some EU buildings. And so we, as a country, or excuse me, the president, on your behalf, by the way, told the Europeans, we're going to share with you all of our technology and how we collect data and how we spy on people.
Welcome back, everybody, for a second hour. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen, and I'm honored to have as guests with me for the next hour and the past hour Dr. Bob Thiel from cogwriter.com. All right, and Dr. Bob, I wanted to read something really quick and get you to comment on it. It says this, and then also I want you to finish your thought because we got cut off on the last one, but I want to not leave this too far behind and get you to comment on it. It says, quote, if the American people had known the truth that Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and other top administration officials knew that the Benghazi attack was an Al Qaeda terrorist attack from the get go, and yet lied and covered this fact up, Mitt Romney might very well be president, Fitton said. Quote, these documents also point to a connection between the collapse in Libya and the ISIS war and confirm that the U.S. knew remarkable details about the transfer of arms from Benghazi to Syrian jihadists. And he said that the documents show that the Benghazi cover up has continued for years and is only unraveling through our independent lawsuits. The article talks about the Freedom of Information Act request that the judicial, um, uh, the I forget the Judicial Watch had put forth and brought out all of this information. And it also confirms that, as I said, mentioned earlier, that both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and the U.S. government, that we have indeed and in fact supported and funded ISIS and, basically funded and armed the terrorists that we are supposedly fighting today, even though we still have open borders and nobody's really serious about securing and locking that down. They say they have, and all the presidents since 9/11 say that they were going to do something about it, but it's all really just a joke. They remain open even to this day. So let me get you to comment on that, and then you can go back to the what you were talking about as far as the mark of the beast and controlling buying and selling.
Right. Well, on that point, I absolutely believe that there was a cover up on the Benghazi matter. I absolutely believe that if the truth was known, that it could have influenced the last presidential election. I don't trust a lot of what they do and don't do, and so I would agree with that. It's also true that the United States directly and indirectly funded those who are now the Islamic State. Um, but I'm not in full agreement with what you read, that it was intentional perhaps, but basically what the United States said was they needed to get opposition to Syria's President Bashar Assad, and they were going to fund opposition, and they did. But what happened was the United States issued an ultimatum, supposedly. Barack Obama said to the president to Syria, if you ever use chemical weapons, you've crossed the red line and we're going to do something. And Syria did, and then allegedly did. The United States was going to do something. Everybody thought that the United States was going to bomb Syria. The Pope, by the way, I'm going to tie all this, get to him a little bit later. The Pope held a prayer vigil to Mary, supposedly, for peace. And then the United States didn't bomb. Now, I actually read a Catholic source last week that said, see, the Pope succeeded. He got the United States not to bomb Syria. Well, what happened was the United States didn't bomb Syria. There were allies of the United States over there, including people in the Islamic State, who said, the United States is not going to resolve this. We cannot rely on the United States. They said they were going to come here and bomb Assad. We would have won. We can't do that. We're going to take matters in our own hands. And they rose up. And these are people that we funded. And then when they started to fight in Iraq, the Iraqis, the United States trained, ran off and left the Islamic State with all the weaponry and a bunch of money. And that actually all happened. So we kind of got a fiasco over there that I think we caused. We also went into bomb Libya for no particular reason I can understand, at least not from a national security perspective. When we finally got rid of Muammar Gaddafi, he was actually cooperating. So either he was doing something really bad that none of us know about, or it was all part of somebody's agenda. So I guess those are my basic comments on what you said. Now, getting back to the whole currency thing and all that, one of my sons and I were talking about something, and as many of your listeners are aware, there have been some talk about getting rid of the all cash or at least $100 bill. Okay. Now, my son said, well, there used to be $1 million bills and $10,000 bills and $1,000 bills. And that's when those were worth a lot more money than they are today. Now they're talking about getting rid of $100 bills. And they may not get rid of them, but I was looking at a $100 bill, I don't know, a week or two ago. And if you look at the new $100 bill, there's a strip in it, kind of a plastic looking strip in there. That if this was a television, we could show one. And it occurred to me that if the government wants to control some buying and selling, the simplest thing to do is just to put some, not necessarily a computer chip, but some kind of a chip in there that computers can recognize. So they can find all the money all the time. So we might see that something like that develop over here. Now, you wanted me to go into a little bit about the New World Order and how that's going to develop. Now, your listeners may or not be aware of this, but last May, the Vatican released something called Laudato Si, which means praise him. And this was Pope Francis's agenda for the New World Order. Now, he didn't call it the New World Order, but that's basically what it was. And it has to do with justice, etc. You look at justice, they basically say, we'll take from people who have and give to those who don't, irrespective of whether you work or not, etc. So to me, that justice sounds an awful lot like some version of communism. Well, in September, I think it was the 27th or 28th, I think it was the 28th, Pope Francis was in the United States and he spoke before the United Nations. And he gave the keynote speech. And then that day, 190 whatever nations there are in the United Nations all voted to approve something that was at first called the New Universal Agenda, otherwise known as the New World Order or the New Catholic Order, because the word universal means Catholic. And I don't believe it's a coincidence that the Laudato Si agenda, encyclical, that Pope Francis had released a few months before was almost identical. Almost identical. So what does this mean in terms of New World Order, if you will, the rise of the beast and the Antichrist power? We're going to see some things. Some things are going to happen that are going to be good, and some things are going to be chaotic. Jesus referred to a period of time called the beginning of sorrows. And he said that all kinds of things are going to happen. We see the ecumenical movement going on right now, and the interfaith movements, where they try to tell you that Pope Francis said, if you're a good atheist, you can be saved by your works. And, that's not in the Bible. That contradicts Acts 4, 10 through 12, and one of Jesus' statements in John chapter 3. You have to believe, you have to have faith. An atheist, by definition, don't believe or have faith. And then you've got the situation where they're trying to say that the Hindus and the Muslims basically worship the same God. They've already told you this about the Muslims. Now they're pushing it more toward the Hindus, etc. And again, these are people who claim to be Christian. And this is all consistent with Laudato Si and the United Nations. Ban Ki-moon, who's the Secretary General of the United Nations, he went to the Vatican, I'm going to say it was 2 years ago. And when he was over there, he said that the United Nations and the Vatican have the same objectives. And Ban Ki-moon has said that we need religious cooperation. And by that, he means basically an ecumenical interfaith agreement. That you basically say your religion's not better than my religion. Okay, my religion's not better than your religion. Well, should have been with freedom of religion, if the United States has this, or how long we'll still have it, we'll see. That you would think your religion is better than some other religion, otherwise you'd be that.
Right.
They want you to act like they're all the same, and they're certainly not. And this is the agenda that they're going to push. Now, the Bible warns in Revelation chapter 13. It says I'm doing this from my memory, so I won't read it verbatim. Maybe it'd be more interesting for your listeners. Revelation 13, verse 4 basically says, all the world's going to marvel at the beast and say, who is like the beast, who's able to make war with him? Well, they're going to marvel because they didn't think it was possible. They're going to marvel because a leader is going to rise up. That same leader is talked about in Daniel chapter 11. He says he's going to enter peaceably, but with deceit. He's going to say the right politically correct buzzwords to get people to say he's the right one. Now, in the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verse 27, there's a discussion of a deal that most prophecy watchers believe is a peace deal. Now, the Bible warns, especially in the New Testament, when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction is going to come.
Yes.
So what's all this got to do with the New World Order and all that kind of stuff? Well, look for some more chaos and unrest, not just in the United States, but over in Europe. You've got all those Muslims over there, and they're not going to be happy with the fact that Angela Merkel, who said they could come in, has also said that most of them are going to have to go away. They're not going to like this, so you're going to see problems. Probably riots, civil unrest, maybe even civil war in parts of Europe. The leaders are going to rise up, and one of them will end up getting others behind him, and they'll respect him. And he's going to go and proclaim peace and safety. Now, according to my Bible, that's a false declaration. It'll be a false declaration of peace. But he's going to get the Vatican behind him, because the Vatican's already behind this United Nations agenda anyway, who's going to endorse it. So you're going to have the beast and the false prophet going along saying, we, humanity, we have the solution. We have the solution to all the problems. Well, something else is going to go on about the same time. The book of Matthew, chapter 24, verse 14, Jesus said, the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the world as a witness, and the end will come. Now, some people believe that the whole world has already gotten the gospel. I don't agree with that. When I read Jesus' statement, what I think this is telling us is that toward the time of the end, a sufficient witness is going to go to the whole world about the true gospel of the kingdom of God, and people will at least hear it. They won't listen to it, but they're going to hear it. And that's going to be in contrast to the message of the beast Antichrist power, which is, hey, guess what? We've got the answer. We can control buying and selling. Therefore, there won't be terrorists rising up. We can control the drug trade. We can ensure equality. We can make sure people aren't starving to death. We can clean up the environment. We can provide peace on earth, goodwill toward men and women, and the other transgenders that they're trying to come up with. And that's going to be real appealing to people. Then the Bible warns along the same time this happens in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that there's going to be all kinds of signs and lying wonders. And people will see those, and they're going to believe their eyes, even though the Bible warns to walk by faith, not by sight. So you're going to see some bad times come, then what looks like good times come, and this new world agenda, new universal agenda, new world order, whatever you want to call it, is going to appeal to a lot of people. And they're going to fall for it. Now, as far as the United States goes, I have a very different view than that movie I mentioned, the one called Armageddon. In the Armageddon movie, at least what I read about it, the solution is that patriots, United States, will rise up with their guns, and they will, fight against the bad guy, the United Nations, and win. Well, I don't think that's the way it's going to go. When I read the book of Daniel chapter 11, verse 39, I see this beast guy, the one who gets in peaceably. It says he goes against the strongest fortresses and he divides their land for gain. What's that talking about? Well, I'll ask you. Who's got the strongest known military right now in the world?
China,
No, United States.
Russia.
No, the United States. We have the strongest still. Russia and China have significant militaries, and they will be used at Armageddon. But right now, the true world military power is the United States. And the Bible says that the strongest power is going to get knocked off. Now, there's other reasons we won't have time to go into this, that I think biblical prophecy points to the destruction of the United States itself.
Jeremiah 50 and 51, the hammer of the nations.
Well, Jeremiah 50:51, you're going to see what happens when Russia and China rises up, by the way, because you'll see there it talks about the great power from the north and from the farthest ends of the earth. And I believe those are a reference to Russia and China, who are going to go against this Babylonian beast power that's going to rise up in Europe. But before that happens, my read of biblical prophecy says the United States is going to get knocked out.
Uh-huh.
Now, I do believe, by the way, that there will be so-called patriots who are going to fight against this. Okay, I'm not discounting that, but I don't think they're the solution. I read, my Bible says the solution is going to be the return of Jesus Christ as establish the kingdom of God on the earth. Those who think that having their own guns is going to stop the government from taking you over, maybe some people will survive this, but biblically, I don't see that they have it. As you alluded to before, Russia and China do have significant militaries. I believe that eventually the beast and the Antichrist are going to underestimate the military might of Russia and China and their allies, and they'll be destroyed, as you mentioned, and it talks about that. In Jeremiah 50 and 51, it says, the king of the daughter of Babylon is all afraid about all this stuff, because finally the gig is up. But before then, I see destruction come to the United States. And one of the things that we, in our church, which is a continuing Church of God, are trying to tell everybody is that don't believe that the politicians are going to be the answer. Whether the American politicians, whether the globalists, or the ones who are more nationalistic like Donald Trump, or the New Universal Agenda of the United Nations, or the European Union, or whatever other federations come together, biblically, they're warned against. But when I've looked through prophecies of other cultures, they embrace this idea. There are prophecies in other cultures that encourage them to accept a new world order.
Right.
This is not only in Chinese prophecies, by the way, which I'll mention. There's Hindu prophecies, Eastern or Greek Orthodox prophecies, which the Russians are in that category, Roman Catholic prophecies, and a few others. I think it's even within Buddhism, I think.
Hey, Dr. Bob, can we do Dr. Bob, can we do a follow-up show where we go through those prophecies?
Sure, we can talk about that another time.
Okay, sure. Well, I think that would be interesting. But please continue.
You had said we're going to cover today is the rise of the Antichrist power.
Right.
And we're seeing steps taking place slowly. People are saying, I heard people say, well, who needs to carry $100 bills? Well, as food and things get more expensive, it's kind of convenient sometimes to not just have a $10 or $20 bills. Again, they're talking about getting rid of this, and they're telling you this will get rid of drug dealers, tax evaders, and terrorists. Well, you know what? 35 years ago, they said, oh, from now on, if you transport more than $10,000 worth of cash, you have to report it. And the government needs to know this way we're going to stop drug dealers and tax evaders and terrorists. Well, that didn't work. And that was when $10,000 was worth probably 5 times more than it's worth now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those didn't solve it. So now they're trying to tell us if we get rid of all cash, that's going to solve it. But the Bible warns about this kind of thing rising up when you run out of the cash, that somehow they're going to be able to control buying and selling. And again, when John was inspired to write the book of Revelation, there was no way you could control buying and selling. It just couldn't be done. And we're getting closer and closer to the time it can be done now, which is another reason to consider why these could be the end times. Whereas again, 100 years ago, it was not possible to control
Right.
minds. Even 20 years, 50 years ago, you couldn't do it. But now they're trying to condition the people, and I know people like you sometimes call them sheeple, but they're
Yes.
trying to condition the people to accept more regulations and to tell you, oh, it only affects the rich, it only affects drug dealers, it only affects this. Where what it really does, it takes away your freedom. Okay, Revolution Radio is part of Freedom Slips, and while there's a lot of things that I'm not going to endorse or whatever that because I don't agree with everything, I do agree with the idea in the United States we're supposed to have more freedom than we have, and it is going away.
Yes.
I
Sadly.
think that does help set the stage for the final Antichrist to rise up. And the United States is helping Europeans implement the same kind of spying or monitoring or whatever you want to call it the government's doing. They're trying to get it over there and other parts of the world, which in my view doesn't line up with the Constitution, at least not the way I've read it. And I don't think they changed it since it was written a couple hundred years ago.
Hold on, Dr. Bob. We'll be right back for final segment. A long time back when you and I first did shows together, I shared with you a link about Albert Pike's vision of the three world wars that had to be perpetuated in order for the global elite to bring forth the agenda of a one world order and to be ruled by a world government. And that was written back in 1871. Well, I want to read just a paragraph from the Third World War and the agenda, which was connected to that, because it also talks about what we're discussing. It says, the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agent sure. Those are the Masonic, brotherhood and people that work for the New World Order of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and the political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an idea but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. Now, the reason I read this whole particular quote is because it talks about the controlled opposition that is utilized, the creation of minorities, and then putting these forces and also funding both sides of the war in order to create the destruction of both of the opposing sides. We see reflected in the passage also Zechariah 12, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling among the nations. And we see also the prepared for social cataclysm, which is to, create the um, what they say in the protocols, the moment where there will be rape, pillage, and plunder, and there will be blood spilled out on the streets. And they're also talking about the destruction of, like America and the Western world's Christianity, and then the rise, which is my opinion that one of the reasons why the manufacturing base of here in America was moved to like the communist countries, these and to destroy America from within, as far as these trade agreements that we were talking about, is because they are funding the rise and um, the rise to prominence of these communistic, atheistic nations, because that's where they are going to have their seat of power as far as the globalists, and they want to use these atheistic, non-God fearing and non-God believing people and countries in order to bring forth the New World Order in the spirit of impunity, and in the way that they want to truly create a prison planet system and rule without any kind of checks and balances or any kind of control. And so, the whole vision of Albert Pike falls in line with the New World Order, and also is preparing, as they said in the very last portion of it, for the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. Dr. Bob?
Well, the certain aspects of the vision that you were reading are definitely consistent with biblical end time prophecy. Now, I wasn't going to go in this part today, but I guess I'll do this for a moment or so. I wrote a book called The Last Pope, and it features Pope Francis on the front cover. Because according to Catholic prophecies, by the way, uh, based on a Catholic bishop by the name of Malachi from Ireland, there were so many popes that he said would happen. And according to the Malachi list, the current pope is the last one. Now, I'm not convinced that Pope Francis is the last one, but assuming he is or is not, this is for your Catholic listeners. The Catholic prophecy warns that there will be a false leader coming from the Church of Rome who will betray the Church of Rome. I believe that the Antichrist will call himself Roman Catholic, or whatever, if they come up with a different term, but he will feign Roman Catholicism. What I mean by that is he'll claim to be this, but he won't really believe it. And so the old joke is the Pope Catholic? You're going to find that there's going to be one who's not. Now, this particular pontiff has done several things that conservative Catholics have been upset about that makes them wonder if he's truly Catholic. But according to various Catholic prophecies, again, so hopefully no Catholic listeners will be offended by this, according to certain Catholic prophecies, the Antichrist will be a bishop of Rome of some type. Now, the Bible warns that the Antichrist is going to be involved in the betrayal of Rome itself. And actually, certain Catholic prophecies agree with that as well. Why do I mention that in view of the vision that you said? Because you're going to see that they're going to go to an even more atheistic or Satanistic system, if you will, after the Church of Rome is betrayed. So the person whose vision that you mentioned has several aspects which are consistent with biblical prophecy. As far as the Church of Rome being betrayed, you can look at Revelation 17. In my book, The Last Pope, I actually explain how certain Catholic prophecies tie into Revelation 17, etc., to a way that most Roman Catholics would not have considered plausible. So, as far as world wars, one of the ways I would differ from the vision that you wrote was that I think the Third World War will actually be the destruction of the United States and its Anglo-Saxon descended allies, United Kingdom, UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. But then another battle associated with Armageddon, if you will, involving Russia and China will happen. Now, the globalists don't really believe the Bible. They don't want you to believe the Bible. If they believed the Bible, they wouldn't be pushing the LGBT agenda, okay? So it's interesting how you've got the United Nations and the Pope supposedly agreeing on the same objectives, whereas the Church of Rome has always said that you shouldn't be homosexual. I mean, I was brought up Roman Catholic, and while I have serious issues with their particular religion, there were certain points that they taught that I'm still in agreement with, and that was one of them was, marriage is supposed to be between a man and a woman, not between two men or two women or all those kind of things. So we are seeing this contradiction where Rome is lining up with the United Nations on things, but they don't have the same, they shouldn't have the same objectives, but oddly they do. Now, does that mean that the end is going to come yet or tomorrow? No, I still think that we've got at least 4 years before the start of the Great Tribulation. But again, prior to that, Jesus warned about something called the beginning of sorrows. And I think that's what we're in now. So we'll see some things happening. Some things will look good. Not all are going to look bad. And those who want to support a globalist agenda are going to try to make everything seem like they're just helping us. They're just doing what we need. And going back to that one book I mentioned, I consider those type 2 people. They're out for whatever they can get, but they lie to you and tell you that they're not. So I have issues with some of the globalists. Of course, some of them are type 3 people. They don't realize how bad what they want to do is, but they certainly are not advocating positions consistent with the Bible or what in my view will be best for the United States, since I'm doing this in the United States, or other countries for that matter. So I guess those are my comments on what you read.
Okay, great. I have one other question, then I'm going to leave it open to you, whatever you want to go into for the last portion of the show. Do you have any idea as to George Washington's vision in connection to, um, the challenges that face America? And because I believe that the visions also talk about a future, um, the trial by fire, if you will, for America and the citizens of the United States. And then also, if you would, after you answer that, just share your website and your contact information, anything
Sure.
of that nature that you'd like to.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to disappoint you because I did look over some of this stuff about George Washington's vision, but I haven't looked at it recently and don't feel that I could do justice to it by commenting because
Yeah, no problem.
I just not enough details that are in front of me. But I will say that many warned about tyranny coming into this country, and that the time would come when people would realize they could vote themselves money out of the treasury. And the United States is the most indebted nation in the history of the world.
Right.
2,600 years ago, in the book of Habakkuk, God had a prophecy written down and said, "This is for the appointed time, the time of the end. It's going to come. This vision's so bad, you should run when you hear it." And it warns about a highly indebted nation that's going to be taken over. And so your listeners can read about this in Habakkuk chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. And it says, "Woe to him who loads up many pledges unto himself. Will not your creditors rise up against you suddenly, and they take you over?" Well, treasury bills are pledges. The United States claims to have about $19 trillion worth of those. But you also have the debt that was made by the Federal Reserve with their quantitative easing program. I think that's another 3 or 4 trillion. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. And of course, that only counts what they count. If you count unfunded liabilities beyond that, then it's so many more times that. So as far as the United States and the founding fathers, I think to a degree they warned about some of the things that we're seeing now. I think the reason that they put in the Bill of Rights was to prevent what we're seeing now.
Right.
Yet, for
Here we
humans,
are.
tried to do a pretty good job, but the Bible warns that there's a way that's going to seem right to humans, but the end thereof isn't going to work. And that's what we're starting to see here as we get closer to the end.
Yes,
Now, the other subject that I'm going to bring up, which for your listeners will be completely different than anything we talked about, was because when you originally contacted me last year and had me on the show, you wanted to talk a little bit about holy days.
Right.
And Now, your listeners might be surprised to find out about this, but in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter 1, it actually says the purpose of the moon is to help mark off when God's holidays are going to be.
Yes.
You don't see that in most translations, but if you actually, into English, but if you actually look at what the Hebrew word means, that's what it means. In some translations of the Bible get it right. And the reason I mention that is a lot of people that say, well, holidays, aren't they like Valentine's Day and Christmas and Easter and stuff like that? Well, those didn't come from the Bible, and those didn't come from the moons and all those kind of things. The Bible does have a listing of holy days. The first one actually comes this month.
Yes.
Now, before I get to it, I'll give you a piece of trivia you and your listeners might find interesting. And I'm gonna do something you're not supposed to do as a guest, but I'm gonna put my host on the spot. Do you know why they call it April Fool's Day? April 1st? Do you know why it's called that?
No.
Okay, then you might find this interesting, and hopefully your listeners will. Once upon a time, the year began on April 1st. Okay? And finally, the Romans changed it to January 1st, because Janus is the god who's from the beginning and the end and all this kind of stuff. Well, some people still wanted to celebrate the new year on April 1st. And they were called April Fools because they wanted to keep the new year then.
Interesting.
I'm not going to read the book of Exodus right now, but in Exodus it tells us the first month of the Hebrew calendar is supposed to be the beginning of the year for you. Now, this is going to surprise a lot of listeners because they think, no, I thought Rosh Hashanah, which comes in the fall, that's the new year. Well, the Jews kind of have two New Years. One is a biblical one for the holy days, and that starts this time of year. Then there's the other one, which is their civil year. Their civil year is how they would basically do their finances. Okay, it was based on how they did tithing and some things like that. But the actual biblical year starts in the spring. So
yes,
it's consistent with the old April 1st time. It probably wasn't always April 1st, but the old days, by the way, for your listeners to remember, the word months meant moons.
Right.
Okay? And so the first of the moon could have been the same one that the people who were following the biblical calendar were observing. Well, later this month, actually, it'd be the 21st of this month, which makes, we're getting very close. The New Year's either tonight or tomorrow night. Anyway, is going to be Passover. Now, you say Passover, that sounds kind of Jewish. But what most people who speak English do not realize is that in most cultures, they don't use the term Easter. They use a word that's Pascha or Pasa, which means Passover. What is now called Easter, believe it or not, was originally Passover. All early Christians kept Passover, by the way. They didn't keep anything called Easter. They did not keep a resurrection holiday. But because of some problems with revolts from the Jews and some other reasons, they switched it from being on the 14th day of the first month of the year at sunset, which is what the Bible tells you. They switched it to a Sunday. And after a while, they switched it from being a holy convocation regarding the bread and the wine to a resurrection holiday, which is in the morning instead of at night. And a resurrection holiday where they started adding things like Easter bunnies and eggs, candy, and stuff like that, which, as your listeners, if you've ever read the Bible, it's not in there. If you haven't read the Bible, let me tell you, there's no such thing as an Easter bunny, Santa Claus, Yule logs, all that kind of stuff. These things are just things are not biblical. So anyway, a lot of people do not realize that early Christians kept biblical holy days. Now, you want me to give some contact information, so let me do that, and then we'll see what time we've got left for the rest of this.
Sure.
First of all, a lot of stuff that we have is free. You can get it at the cogwriter.com website. We even have a booklet called Should You Observe God's Holy Days or Demonic Holidays? And this booklet, you can just read it online for free. It goes into stuff, and it's very referenced in details. Tells you about God's holy days and when they come. It tells you a little bit about the development of the other holidays that other people keep. Again, you can get that at the cogwriter.com website. Now, some of the books that we mentioned are also at the cogwriter.com website. It's like the one I wrote on Barack Obama, Prophecy and Destruction United States, the one I wrote on Hillary Clinton, Prophecy and Destruction United States, and the one I wrote called The Last Pope, Could Pope Francis Be the Final Pope? Those are available there, but you could also get those last three books over at Amazon.com. But again, my last name is spelled Thiel. It's Thiel. It's pronounced differently than it sounds in English, Thiel. And if you type my name in at Amazon and type in any of these things, they'll come up. So if you don't want to go to the website, if you want a hard copy of a book so you can show your friends, look at 20 reasons why Hillary Clinton's apocalyptic. Look at what Dr. Thiel said Barack Obama was going to do. Look, in fact, he did do these things. Get them to realize that biblically based prophecy is accurate. We've got an election now. You allowed me to quote 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 4, both from Mrs. Clinton, both from Mr. Trump. And to me, it was patently obvious that their kinds of attitudes were warned against. You know, you've got Donald Trump telling people, be selfish for your country, and I'm going to reward you. You got Hillary Clinton, by the way, basically saying, you've gotten a raw deal. White, straight, non-corporate males are the whole problem in this country. And the solution is to have the LGBT people rise up, give women more equality, take from this, do all this. So she's appealing to another type of greed. And this is what we're seeing in these end times. But again, now if your listeners want some daily news, every day I average 3 posts at the cogwriter.com website regarding world news and prophecy. So if they go there, there's a link about daily news. They can go there and they can look at it. And also, they can also, if they want, they can give their email address and sign up for a free newsletter, which there's never any advertising on. It only has a summary of the 3 news posts in the last 24 hours. And we don't sell your name. We don't use your name for anything. Okay, just if you want to get it more automatically, you're welcome to get it. But it's all, you don't even have to do any of that. You just go to the cogwriter.com website, learn about that. And as far as our church, it's the Continuing Church of God, and you would go to ccog.org. But I have a link to that also at the other website. So anyway, that's that. As far as the holy days go, people will be surprised that Passover was kept by the early Christians. But because we now, most people observe something they call Easter, which has not got to do really with Passover, but it was the replacement for it. They do not realize early Christians kept Passover. They think it's just some Jewish thing. And that's simply not the case. And other biblical holy days are coming up. The Days of Unleavened Bread will be later this month. I think in June this year, Pentecost will be there. Some religions, or many, claim to keep Pentecost, but I don't think they really understand what it means. And if your listeners want to know about that, you can get our free booklet, Should You Observe God's Holy Days or Demonic Holidays? Now, as far as the New World Order goes, we also have a free booklet called The Gospel of the Kingdom of God. You say, well, what's that got to do with the New World Order? Everything. I explain stuff from the New Universal Agenda. I explain how that's a false gospel, and that the true gospel of the Kingdom of God shows how Jesus Christ will intervene and fix the world. And so that's also free. We don't ask for money. We don't ask for suggested donations. Okay, so if you're not part of our church, everything is totally free. If you're part of our church, yes, we expect that Christians will give tithes and offerings, but that's between you and God. Okay, so we never have suggested donations for anything that we've got. And so your listeners can go there and learn more. And you asked me to come on again. And one thing that I do talk about sometimes, which is controversial on the Christian side, is discussion of non-biblical prophecies. But let me say this as a teaser for the next time I'm on, so you can write it up, I suppose, whenever I'll be on again. But people do not realize that Satan has a plan. And in the Bible says we're not supposed to be ignorant of Satan's devices. And at the end time, people are going to teach doctrines of demons. And one of those doctrines of demons, by the way, is that in the end times, 2 leaders are going to rise up. A militaristic leader in Europe and a pope who does miracles, and the world's supposed to rally behind them. And when I read the Bible, I see the Bible warns me about a leader rising up in Europe called the Beast or the King of the North, and the false prophet rising up, who's the Antichrist. Yet there are satanically inspired prophecies that say this is a good thing, and they're not limited to, let's say, Catholic or Eastern Orthodox writings. So I'll have to leave that teaser since I hear your bumper music starting to come on.
Yes, just let me know, Dr. Bob.